Okay. Good morning, everyone. As always, I hope things are well where you are. I wanted to just do a real brief kind of video, just a generic kind of general thing to cover a little bit of specifically for this, I guess, as most of you now have got your lit reviews in or are now getting your lit reviews in. We're definitely kind of hitting a I don't want to call it a crucial point, but it's an important step and it's kind of a big step. And part of my thinking behind this is that, of course, with all of you, you're coming from totally disparate and different situations insofar as like kind of your experience and your background with research courses, APA style writing, research papers, literature reviews. Like some of you have got a bunch of this under your belt. You've been working in research starting with 301 a while back, and you've done some since, and you've written APA papers. And so you're probably in those scenarios like relatively comfortable. You kind of know the ropes, how things are to be constructed, what to include and where, and all of that stuff. But I know for other of you, you maybe had the intro research like years ago at this point and put together a paper, and then maybe did or didn't really have anything that included a research or a writing heavy sort of component. Anyway, this is all to say, like, I try kind of to not make too many assumptions, take sort of a shotgun approach, and try to meet everybody as best I can in the places that they are. So, the goal of putting this together, and I will try to keep it brief, I promise, is just to kind of, again, in a very generic way, take sort of where things sit, at least in the structure of the course right now, which is hopefully you've been digging through the literature, you've been reading a bunch of articles, you've been finding the things that are relevant and provide information, direction, guidance, definitions, methods, all the things that you're needing to get your official project constructed and put together. And hopefully you're having success in navigating the literature and finding those things that are going to be most informative. I know that I've been talking in one-on-one conversations with a number of you, trying to help you on your specific topics and providing advice, that sort of a thing. If you're one of the people that I haven't been in as much touch with about those things and you would like some of that, I'm happy to try and talk a bit more about scouring the databases, climbing through the literature, finding the tools to like narrow it down and actually find the things that you're looking for, because often it can seem like in this vast ocean of 5 million hits on your search terms, and then you start crawling through them and you're like, there's nothing out there on the exact topic. There probably is. It's just a pain in the ass to find it. But at any rate, I put that out there for what it's worth. What I wanted to speak about right now is the place where I think most of you, us, we, whatever, are at, which is kind of having done the literature review, at least finding a sufficient amount of literature to kind of provide the backing and the rationale and justification sort of for the project that you're putting together. And the literature review is constructed in its own sort of format. You're kind of taking the individual studies, right? We're going to look at this one by Hendrickson and Lauren something, right, from 1986, and they did this experimental design. They defined their variables in this way. Here's how they went about it. Here's what they found. Here's how they interpreted it. And then in 1998, there was Johnson and Carlson who did X, Y, and Z, and they did it a little bit different, or these folks did this correlational design. You're kind of pulling in the different studies. You're given some level of explanation and description, some summation about them, and then ideally, of course, like trying to take the body of that literature, each of the individual sort of pieces, but those pieces, of course, constitute a discipline, an area of study, and then all of them, a sort of attempt to come from their own direction, their own triangulation on a common theme, on a topic, on a thing, the thing that you're interested in. So the harder part, hopefully not too much so. But it's one thing to describe the studies, to try and provide the most meaningful and relevant parts of those studies as they pertain to your research. You know, for instance, like if this study wasn't particularly interesting in terms of the outcomes, you know, they weren't quite looking at the same thing in the same way that you are, but you know what, they used this particular method, or they used this collection of questionnaires or inventories, this sort of a thing, and that does relate. That's what you're going to want to pull from that. So within the literature review, perhaps you've given a pretty thorough summation of kind of what the overall project is. But, you know, if from that particular article, the meat, the part that really relates directly to your study was simply the methodology, you know, as you begin to integrate, you're going to take the sections from the other pieces. Well, these people sampled from this population. That's how this study relates. These guys had the methods that I'm interested in. This couple of studies here, these things all kind of suggest the outcomes that I anticipate with the hypothesis that I'm kind of rattling around. So you're going to take, right, the pieces and the parts that come from those disparate pieces from the literature, and as you integrate them, you're going to take the relevant pieces and try to construct what is ultimately, as I said before, sort of the rationale for your study. And I have lots of generic kinds of advice, you know, and take them for what they're worth, but they are, I think, useful and important. Imagine as you do begin this construction process, as you start to put together what I'm going to talk about, which is taking the literature review and adapting and evolving that thing, that it's going to become the introduction for your overall APA paper, that integration component, creating the rationale, is difficult to do. And one of the best tools, insofar as my thinking goes on this, is you need to think about not just writing it in the way that you wish to write it. You need to write it out as best you can from your own cognition and your own stuff rattling around. But you have to go back and reflect on it, look at it and read it with the idea in mind that you're taking somebody who is completely and absolutely naive to this subject. You need to make no assumptions about who this reader is, what their background is on the topic. You need to just assume, picture the most generic situation. You're stuck in an elevator, or you're sitting at a bar, or you're on the airplane, and you got this random ass person sitting next to you or standing next to you. You're going to chit chat, and they're asking about your research. They don't know anything about what it is that you do. So as you write all of this out, keep that in mind. That's the person you're writing for. They don't know anything about the background. You don't need to give them super in-depth detail, esoteric things that don't directly relate. You need to clasp on to like the meat and potatoes that comes from each section, so that you can take this person, sort of take them by the hand, walk them through what you're walking them towards is your study. And so to arrive at your study, you got to have some background. Okay, what the hell do you even mean by these terms, right, that you're using? They have they have definitions, but then they also have operational definitions, right? The actual, where the rubber meets the road, the way that we define this thing in a tangible, quantifiable way within a study. Where does that come from? How are you going to set up your study? Well, probably that's going to be informed by other pieces from the literature and the like. You have to kind of walk that person through. Here's what has been done. Here's largely what has been demonstrated. Here's how the people, the samples, the populations that they've worked with. Here are the methods and the tools that they used to get at those questions. And once you have that person sort of sufficiently immersed into understanding at least the nuts and bolts that constitute the area that you're interested in, the topic that you're interested in, then as you sort of arrive to your study and say, therefore, you know, I am going to sample this population. I'm going to have designed this study in this way. And I hypothesize that given defining these things this way, going about it in this fashion, with this particular sample of individuals, this should be the outcome. That's the hypothesis, right? And then, of course, that's it. End of story for your introduction, because that's where you're then going to shift into the study, the methods section, and all of that sort of thing. Of course, the goal is that by the time you reach the point where you're saying, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm hypothesizing, that your reader can say, yeah, that makes sense, right? Sure, yeah, all this stuff you just told me with what's been shown in the past and things that they've done and the, X, Y, and Z that comes from the background, yeah, that makes sense to me, why you're going to do what you're doing, why you anticipate getting what you're going to get. It all sounds so easy when you just say it like that, right? This is, wait for it, this is the most artistic thing you're going to see from me. So you've hopefully seen this before, so I apologize if it's a repeat, but I also don't, because it's important. But if you haven't seen it, when we talk about the overall research paper, the overall APA, whether it's a proposal or it's the write-up at the end, which ultimately is what you're constructing once you get your data, like we're writing this study up in a way as though, hey, we're going to send this thing off for publication or whatever. But it is the all-powerful hourglass figure. You're welcome. I drew this myself just now. This is your tuition dollars hard at work. Anyway, obviously in the entirety of the paper, you're going to have a title page somewhere up here that constitutes a whole page. You're going to have an abstract. We do abstract's the last thing we're going to do. It has its own page. But then we come down to your introduction, right? And the reason we have this sort of hourglass idea is, again, think about the papers that you've been reading. Think about all the articles and the way that they are set up. We're taking our reader down through all of this background and narrowing down to your study. So to start off the intro at the sort of top of the hourglass, right, you're going to start broad, very broad. So what is the overall area of something that you're interested in? For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to go with one of the last things that I was writing about. So my research was on risk-sensitive foraging theory, sort of what makes individuals risk averse versus what makes individuals risk prone. And so right out of the gates, I'm going to sort of introduce this large-scale topic of risk sensitivity and what does it mean to be risk averse? What does it mean to be risk prone? Just in the most general sort of way. Now, for my study, the intro has to be actually quite long, much longer than anything you need to be doing. But ultimately what I was doing is I'm looking at human subjects in my study, but my methods actually come from a whole body of literature that are with non-human animals. So stuff done with primates, stuff done with avians and rats and all manner of different species. And I'm actually utilizing most of the models that come from that literature and trying to apply it now to the research I'm doing with these human subjects. So what I need to do in my introduction is to get down to explaining my actual study. My reader has to understand, okay, here's the global big picture definitions that come from the whole spanning field, right? That the people all around the world, we all sort of know these definitions and things like that. But then I'm going to shift into the background, the content that is the kind of stuff that's coming out of your literature review. Now, I'm not going to go necessarily study by study by study. In this one, Carrico and Johnson did X, Y, and Z, and here's how they did it, and here's what they found, and here's this, and here's that. I'm going to present the study, but I'm going to present the parts that are relevant. And so as I'm describing working with yellow-eyed juncos and working with food reinforcers and differential risk paradigms and that, I'm just going to give you the quick summary that says work's been done with avians, including this species, and also with starling jays and with pigeons and with these, and here's kind of the situation, here's what's generally been found with avians. Now let's move into mammals. Now let's go into specifically primates. And then I have a whole other body of literature that comes from human subjects. That's a very different thing. I need to give you a little bit of background on that. So here's some background on what's been done with humans, where they've largely focused on cognition and affect, emotional, kind of higher order sorts of things, unlike all this animal literature where they're just looking from sort of evolutionary, biological, learning and schedules of reinforcement, sort of a combination of these things. And once I've sort of introduced all of that, I'm narrowing down, right? I'm narrowing down to what I'm going to do, which is hopefully an integration of all of this. So as I've moved from the broad topic down into more narrow, specific studies, specific species, specific methods, specific models, all of the things that are going to be important for the person reading to understand, I'm narrowing down to the point at which now I'm trying to integrate it. The methods from this non-human animal literature avoids all of these potential confounds. Here's what's kind of been found with humans, but that work that's been done with humans has completely ignored evolutionary background or, thinking about us as mammalian primates and blah, 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 until I finally get down to the very end of the introduction, which will be, that's where we are. So that's where I'm going to shut up about content. But hopefully what I've done is I've narrowed down, right? I started from the big broad topic of here's what foraging theory is about. Here's how we assess risk and how we define it. Here's all this work that's been done with all these different species and largely what's been found and what their methods look like. And here's all this work that's been done with humans, what they've found, what some of the shortcomings are. And then now down, getting right to the bottleneck, here's how all of that kind of relates and where I feel like it leaves an extremely open question. So I am going to take these methods and some of these models that come from the animal literature that I've described. I'm going to work with human subjects, and I'm going to try to sort of mitigate issues that comes along with working in cognition or emotion and these kinds of things. And I get down right to the end, and the last thing that you're going to be stating then in your introduction is, here's my study now. And this is a thing I see all the time in the the 301, right? The more introductory research courses, which is you don't talk about your study anywhere up here right out of the gates. A lot of early research papers open with, this current study endeavors to blah, 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 blah. No, I don't do that. You're introducing the field, you're introducing the ideas, you're wading this person out into the waters of this body of literature. And only once you get to the very end of the introduction do you say, therefore, right? I've just built a rationale, I've just built this justification, therefore this study, right? Here's what we're going to do, here's how I'm going to do it, here's what's going to happen, or hypothesize to happen. Now, we'll get to the rest of this, right? Because the rest of the hourglass figure is going to constitute the rest of the paper when we get there. So just to foreshadow that a bit, you state your hypotheses here, in essence, what the study is going to be about, and that's where we enter the bottleneck, which is going to be the methods section, starting with, okay, who are the participants going to be? What are the materials or the apparatus or the measurement tools, inventories, surveys, whatever they are, that are going to be used, and how are they going to be measured? Then, of course, all of the procedural section. We'll cross these bridges when we get there. But, of course, this is going to be a powerfully detailed thing, such that the reader can truly understand step by step by step all the minutia, right, that comes with it. This is why reading these things causes us physical and emotional pain, is because they're so dry, so detail oriented and the like. But of course that's done very intentionally. And then you can see here, obviously once we have your data, we'll do the analysis, we'll get the results. I made that results section very small, very much on purpose, because all we do in the results section is, this is the analysis that we used, here are the data that we used it on, here's the statistical outcome, period. Then we'll go into the discussion section where we then begin to unpack that. And then, of course, this is going to expand back out with the hourglass, right? We're going to start extremely narrow, I just gave you what the data were. So what does that mean relative to my hypotheses or hypothesis right here? Why, start to expand out. Why do we feel like we got these data? Here's where we put observations about here's what actually happened with the methods, or here's what happened with the sampling. Here are good things or bad things that came up during the process of doing this, etc. And then we're expanding it back out. What does all of this mean now in reference to or in relation to everything I explained to you up here? How does it fit into the bigger picture of this arena of study or this particular discipline in the literature? And then lastly, sort of expanding out to the more broad, which is what if there were shortcomings in this study, how could those be addressed in subsequent research? What are the next steps? What are some new lines of research or things that naturally follow from what it is that we found in this particular study? Things like that. That's getting way ahead of ourselves, I realize, but I feel like I'd be remiss not to at least acknowledge some of the other parts. Where we're at right now, hopefully, is you have literature under your belt. You've got at least a pretty good sense for the work that has been and is being done in the area that you're interested in. You're hopefully parsing apart, finding the pieces that relate directly to your construction and implementation and interpretation of the study that you're doing. And I know, again, this all sounds very easy offhandedly when I just talk about it in this very generic, general way. I know that we're, again, rubber meets road sort of thing. Like it's way more challenging to put those things together in the way that we're sort of describing, and probably makes sense, right, to all of us. As always, right, I'm going to be here, so as things are coming in, I'm going to be trying to provide observation, feedback, guidance, whatever I sort of can as I'm going through your materials. One thing I would powerfully suggest, I guess that's a way to say that, I strongly suggest, yeah, that's the same thing. Okay, let's play the synonym game. If you can, have other people read through what you've written. That maybe seems obvious, but it doesn't matter how long you spend doing this kind of stuff. I've been doing this for what feels like 80 years now. And even still, when I sit down to write, one of the biggest hurdles to overcome as a writer is that I know all the literature, because I've spent all my time swimming around in that stuff and interpreting it and internalizing it and integrating it and thinking about it. And so when I go to write about that literature, it's very easy for me to have the thoughts in my head, translate those thoughts into my sentence construction and the way that I'm describing things. And then I, of course, go back and read what I wrote, and I think, my God, that's terrific. That's beautiful. There's been nothing more clearly written in the history of our species than what sits on this current document. But of course, the issue is, of course it's clear to me because I wrote it. I was the one with the thoughts. I came up with the language to fit those thoughts. I read the language that I wrote that came from my thoughts, and I'm now thinking it. Of course it's clear to me. That doesn't mean for one moment it's clear to anyone else. If you don't believe me, I mean, just think about two. I try to construct assignments. I try to put together exams. I have learned to never release anything without having another set of eyeballs and a different nervous system behind those eyeballs to look at that and say, yes, I also understand that, because things get lost in translation. So for what it's worth, if you have a roommate, a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, parents, coworkers, I don't care who, I mean, any old person who is willing to take the time to scrape their eyeballs over your writing, kind of work through it in their head and provide a little bit of honest feedback, it really does go a long way. Because again, it's impossible to escape our own cranium and all the sort of biases and assumptions and the things that we bring to the table. Again, I'll be trying to provide those things, obviously, from my side and whatever else. But for what it's worth, if you're able to do that, it's a good thing. What else? I think, how long have I been talking at you now? Okay, that's probably enough because I'm pushing a half hour. So we're gonna stop it there. I hope this helps. Again, I know it's very general, you know, in the way that I'm talking about things, but I do hope maybe it makes things a little more clear, I guess, as to how to go about these things. You know the spiel, right? As always, like if it's not clear or if you want to expand on any of this stuff or any other specific questions that arise from this, like you know where to find me. I'm here and we'll hammer it out. That's not a problem whatsoever. It's right now it's noon on Thursday the 22nd. I was going to give you a heads up. I'm scooping up my creatures and my partner, and we're going to be camping this weekend, so I will be away from the computer for a little while. So if you don't hear back from me like over the weekend or something, like I'm hopefully lost in the wilderness somewhere with zero internet access, ideally. But I'll be back next week, at least by Monday evening or whatever, and I'll be sure to be right on top of getting things back to you all. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Yeah, hope all is well. Hope things are shaping up, and I'm excited to keep working on these things. We're making great progress, and it's gonna be good. So take care. If I'm not in touch with you between now and then, I hope you have a great weekend. And yeah, cheers. I'll see you on the other side.